I think then the Johnny Depp thing happened. And that became the rallying cry because this was this was a bigger name. And
well,
this was
also
also
a very good chance she's lying,
Yeah. So it's it's a much stronger case. It's a much bigger name, and it, Amber Heard specifically utilized and tried to weaponize Me Too, which
Yeah, that's a
I think Me
problem
Too was a
too.
weaponization from the beginning in a way.
Yeah, let's talk about Me Too, because Me Too's an example of intense scope creep in a movement, and I think it's important. The original idea of Me Too, I believe, a woman by the name of Tarana Burke was the founder of it, sort of. I mean, Alyssa Milano was the one that brought it to popular consciousness, but even she said, no, I had no intention of claiming I created this. Interesting, charmed connection. We've got a theme.
I will say, in Bobby's video, I ended up reading a quote from Alyssa Milano, and after all the time I spent in the anti-SJW side,
Yeah,
it felt kind of poetically ironic, and I'm like, yeah, I owe her this.
yeah. Well, he gave me Holly Marie Combs because he knows
Heard.
Piper's my favorite. So thank you, Bobby. But yeah, the whole idea of Me Too initially was sort of bringing it out of the shadows, not crucifying men, not creating a crusade. The whole idea is Tarana Burke recognized that when she was dealing with victims of sexual assault, she was shutting down and shutting victims down because it happened to her too, and she didn't want to deal with it. And that's why it's called Me Too. It's the idea of, let's be honest and let's say, hey, yeah, me too. It happened to me too. That was it. It wasn't about massive, war on men. That was all it was. It was when we got into things like Time's Up in Hollywood, which was always, I was like, that's nice. They're going to throw a bunch of money at it. They're going to do a bunch of lip service, and nothing is going to change because the powers that be don't really want it to. That's what Hollywood always does. They say the right things, they do the right things, and wait for things to go back to the bad old days. And
I hate to say this, but I did read some of the Time's Up stories from actresses, and I'm like, okay, but you went to his hotel room. I'm like, I don't want to victim blame, but there is part of me that's like,
an average person can't know how much business is conducted in hotel rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Also, keep in mind, some of these girls, they're originally from small towns, they are naive. But yeah, I mean, that was something I had to, it's a real problem, right? Because if you don't go, you don't get the gig. And I had to start being much more guarded at conventions. And of course, then I wasn't invited as a convention guest anymore because I was seen as too polarizing. But when I just did my job and, went along to get along, guys were going around saying they'd slept with me. And I don't care personally, but that's incredibly disrespectful to my husband.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a guy disrespecting another guy right there. And there's no winning. There's absolutely no winning. And that's what I hope people recognize. It's not that there's no winning just for men in the current paradigm. I got blacklisted from a local anime con because a guy with a foot fetish came in and started breathing heavily while I was doing art modeling dressed as Slave Leia. I didn't complain. Someone else who was there did. And I got blacklisted because I made trouble. And there's no winning in this current. And, this was somebody a woman in a position of power who didn't like cosplayers. She was jealous of pretty girls. And so any chance she got to stick it to one of us, she did. And it was well known.
Okay, I'll be honest. Sorry to bring up the Charmed video again, But that was something I brought up.
Yeah.
Was it's like it seems like a lot of this attitude towards, oh, women shouldn't dress pretty because male gaze. It's not actually about the male gaze. It's it's just that
Yeah.
you wouldn't look that good in that outfit, and so you're jealous,
Yeah.
or you're afraid that that's what men really want, and you've been told that's what
Yeah.
men really want, and so cover it up so men don't know that I'm not that.
Okay,
And,
I'm gonna drop a hot take here
mm-hmm,
because I was around at the time. The reason Buffy was lauded as feminist and Charmed wasn't is because the Charmed actresses had boobs and wore push-up bras or no bra. That's it. And the truth is that, the actresses on Buffy were starving themselves and Joss Whedon was making them miserable. But because they looked prepubescent, they looked younger, they
mm-hmm.
were seen as less, I don't know, threatening, competition, overtly sexual, whatever. Charm didn't have a storyline where sex turned the dreamboat love interest evil. Like, God, how did anybody claim Buffy was feminist? Well, because feminism isn't feminist a lot of the time.
And like, for me, it's like you have that relationship with Buffy.
Yeah.
Mine is the Mists of Avalon.
Oh, I was repelled by that
Yeah.
right
And it's
away.
like
It just
I know you've read it as well,
yeah.
but I I read it when I was 11 or 12,
Oh
I
my God.
think. And I remember being so disturbed. And I'm like, and ironically, a teacher let me read it. Not my teacher. She was
Mm-hmm.
a friend of the family who taught like a grade below me. And she's like,
Mm-hmm.
if there's anything you don't understand, just keep reading.
Okay.
She confronted her about this years later because,
Yeah.
like, obviously it stuck with me. And I'm like, you thought that was okay? And she's like, oh, well, you turned out fine. No, I did not. But
Interesting.
it's looking back at it, it's one thing that people talk about is like, oh, well, men have mistreated women for so long, which in historical context is true,
Right.
but the goal should not be women turning around and misusing power the same way.
Right.
And
That
that's what
that
you
doesn't
see
solve
all
anything. Yeah.
that's what you see all throughout Mists of Avalon. And it's not even just misusing power against men, it's using it against other women.
Well, that
It's
was I remember Queen of the Damned by Anne Rice was held
mhm,
up as some big feminist work for a while when I was younger and I read it. It's like she's horrible.
mhm.
It was almost like the proto girl boss trend.
And it's like after after everything came out about what Marion Zimmer Bradley did to her own children.
Do we dare get into it for people who don't know? Because there are a lot of people that still don't know.
Oh boy.
Because it's
Okay.
it is legitimate grooming. She was
Okay.
basically offer. Yeah. Do you want to explain it? Because it's
Yes.
woof. Okay.
So, for context, Marion Zimmer Bradley was sexually abused by her own father.
Yeah.
Um, they lived in the country, and he would take her out in his truck, and so I believe she came to hate her mother for letting it happen. But
Common.
she developed an intense hatred of women despite being a lesbian.
Yeah.
But so she married two men over the course of her life. The first, she had two children with a son and a daughter. She later remarried, and you'll have to remind me the name of her second husband because he was a well known author in the science fiction
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
And they would bring young men into their house to mentor.
Uh-huh.
And some of these boys were like as young as 12.
Mm-hmm.
And she would groom them for her husband
Yep.
and create situations where he could abuse these boys. She
Yep.
had a woman who was also her life partner,
Yep.
and she abused her own children. She also would try to convince her daughter that she was transgender
Yep.
and that she was actually a man. And it's like, the daughter was the one who came out and revealed pretty
Yep.
much everything.
Yep.
And she has since become very staunchly Catholic, and she is anti-gay. And people are like, oh, well, I can't take her seriously. What do you
Well,
expect?
yeah, there's an example of she went the same way her mother did. Um she treated everybody as of the identity class as bad instead of recognizing, no, that was a bad person who did bad things to you. Just because other people are like that doesn't mean, doesn't mean everyone of that descriptor is like that.
Yeah. But like in that case, I'm not even going to hold it against her.
I
It,
don't either. It
it's,
doesn't mean she's not telling the truth.
yeah. And so just the stuff is absolutely atrocious. And it's kind of funny because when I started to go looking for information, because I like drama like that. I like, God, it feels so bad to say, but it's like I like long YouTube video essays on people being terrible.
Okay. All right.
I'm weird. And so it's like I went looking for information on it, like, okay, so what actually happened? And there's not much because it is so niche, but I stumbled on a lot of witch YouTube, witch
Yeah.
book YouTube communities. And some of them were saying, oh yeah, I never noticed it until afterwards. And I'm like, how do you
Yeah, how'd you
not?
miss that?
Like there is one scene during a festival of Beltane, which is a
Mm-hmm.
pagan fertility festival,
Mm-hmm.
where like a 6 or 7 year old girl is grabbed and just brutally raped on the ground.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
mean,
it's
keep
it
in mind in fantasy literature that's less uncommon than people like to think.
yeah. And so but I'm just like, because that disturbed me so much. And I'm like, how do you come away from this thinking, oh, this is so female empowerment, this was so formative for me? Well, that makes me very wary of you. And then of course it turned into the argument of, oh, well, has this book done enough for women that we should overlook what the author did? And I'm just like, what the
Yeah.
author did is so baked into this book.
Yep.
And they argue, oh, well, if you buy it now, apparently all the proceeds are given to charity. I don't care, burn it, burn all
I
her books.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to keep this stuff around
Mm-hmm.
to be studied so we can learn from past mistakes.
You
Because
can, yeah,
it's the abuse of children in historical fantasy keeps getting rewarded,
mhm.
and it's not, the way it's done is not historic. If that happened in history, the child's male relatives would likely go in and seek restitution and possibly go in and kill everybody in
Okay,
revenge.
so two things I'm gonna bring up. So one, I want to give context to what I'm saying about women in that book
Mm-hmm.
using power badly, the same way they accuse men of using it. There is a high priestess who orchestrates the rape of Morgan and Arthur, who are her
Uh-huh.
niece and nephew.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fertility pagan ritual that is the king making ritual for Arthur.
And to be clear, this is a retelling. This is not something that's in the
Yeah.
original stories as much fucked up shit as there is the original stories.
Yeah, no, this is a retelling. So it is all throughout the whole book.
Yeah, yeah.
So the other thing I'm going to bring up, there's actually a series called, I think it's The Last Kingdom, which is about, it's set in medieval Dark Age England. I know
Mm-hmm.
those are very different. It's set in Dark Age England. And so there's this Anglo boy who's adopted by Danes,
Mm-hmm.
which is the Vikings that settled in England, essentially.
I think this
And
has been adapted recently to something.
yes,
Yeah.
there was a series.
Yeah.
I don't remember where it was, but in that, speaking to what you were saying about the male relatives, there's a scene where this one Dame Boy pulls down the top of this one girl. And so her father comes to the boy's father and he's like, he saw my daughter unclothed. I'm taking his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, that's what would actually happen.
Yeah, the Danes did not fuck around. Nobody from that part of the world did.
No, and it's like, okay, you can say, oh, well, it's because they were treating women as second-class citizens who couldn't look after themselves. Look, it's a catch-22, but like at the same time, there is a bit of showing of value for women
Yeah,
in that. And you
yeah.
can argue, oh, it was just protecting her virginity because that's all that mattered. Okay, but there is still a protection level in that.
Yes, it wasn't just Sansa Stark where everybody looked the other way when she was horribly raped. That didn't happen. You didn't do that to women. Now, okay, in the books, that was a different character. Fair.
Even so, like
like
it's a crappy thing to do.
And rape wasn't just okay. What I always forget Ramsay Bolton did was not considered rape back then, but you couldn't just mistreat women. People noticed, and it was seen as a mark against you. Now, does that mean women were equal?
No.
Fuck no. Both can be true, right? I'm so sick of this. If you find one thing that someone did ever at all that was good, oh, women weren't mistreated. No, that's not how these things work. The mistreatment that goes on to this day is because we don't talk about this stuff, and we don't we don't we're pretty lousy at validating the humanity of everybody. And because of that, when people are uniquely mistreated, it's really, really bad. And it should not have to be that bad.
No.
Anyone to give a damn. But the problem with, and now we're going to get into my particular, people are going to be pissed off at me for this, and I don't care. This is, I know the right people are going to be mad, as opposed to, when we talk about men, we obviously mean only some men. When we talk about women, we only mean some women. They are too big. The categories are too big to talk about every single, and I wish that was just a given. And for whatever reason, it's not. But, saying that, here goes. The Marxist organizing and the Marxist academic frameworks in feminism are why sociopaths are ruling the show. Because the minute you get any sort of collectivism as an organizing principle, that means on paper, it's lateral. Oh, we vote on everything. We agree. We're an autonomous collective, blah, blah. In reality, the biggest bully is running things. And they're not elected. They're not chosen. They don't have to earn the regard of their peers. They just take over because nobody's in charge and no one is empowered to stop them. And most of the things that people rightly complain about regarding modern feminism come down to that. It comes down to the fact that there are some very, very bad people who are making decisions that are splattering on all of us, even those of us who don't agree. And because the bad people are in charge and everybody's terrified of the bad people, the minute you try to counter the bad people, you're excommunicated. And that goes right back to what I said about the feminist sex wars in academia. That's the structure. It's a structural problem. And there are just some theories that are ridiculous. And you talk to any credible academic, credible student of history, and they'll go, yeah, that's nonsense. It makes no sense. That wasn't even what the original intention was. But it's ended up on social media, where again, it's a narcissist playground. It's a sociopath playground. And there's, you know, YouTubers are people. The reason I don't do better in YouTube is because I'm an introvert. And so it wears me out. And I see the people who revel in the noise, revel in the fight, revel in people coming after them. It's like, that's just not me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a healthy person that enjoys upsetting people. You know, do I admit I enjoy when certain people get upset at me, because making the right enemies is an indication you're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
Do I enjoy upsetting, you know, regular people just going about their lives because something got misconstrued that I said? No, that really upsets me. And I understand that there's a point at which you can't do anything about it, because people come to the table with baggage and they hear things that aren't there. You know, if I say something and it comes out stupid, that's fine. But if people are reading in and talking about implications that aren't there, I can't do anything about it. But am I happy that that regular person who's, like you said, clearly coming from a place of pain is upset? No, I'm not. And I'd love to be able to do something about it. But I'm not out there ratioing people for a bad take. And I hate the whole ratio thing anyway, because just because something's unpopular doesn't mean it's wrong. But it's
There's a line in the 2015 Cinderella where she says, just because it's done doesn't mean it's what should be done.
well, exactly. And unfortunately, any dialogue driven by academia is a slave to what's previously been done, because you require citations. And so some not great stuff has had, and this is true on both sides of the culture war. I mean, you read some of Jordan Peterson's papers and his citations are archaic. Like they're stuff that just isn't used anymore from the 70s, before they discovered the replication crisis in psychology. But you know, you get something like, I'm going to be real careful here. You get something like Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks has written some really insightful stuff, especially early in her career. But then Bell Hooks descended into, you know, slagging Beyonce. And that was a instance where credit where credit's due. People like Auntie Bell, no, you're wrong on this one. You know, Beyonce's an entertainer. She's not responsible for the morality of the masses.
No.
But, you know, Bell Hooks did some really, really insightful stuff on, for one thing, why it's important that men, especially in her case, you know, she was talking about Black men, have a safe place to look at women, to be curious about women. And that, I remember reading that and going, well, this is really interesting. But if something is a workable theory, if something is right, there's a universality to the application. And the problem with anything interdisciplinary is when people start applying it and start getting results they don't expect or don't like, they just go, oh, no, not here. It's different. But it's not. There is a universality to men. You know, unfortunately, the terminology is terrible for this because it's low status men, which I don't like feeding into, but that's the paradigm they're dealing with. There has to be a place for, you know, low status men to be able to look at pretty ladies. And if you deny that, you're gonna get a lot of problems. And whether it's right or wrong, this is a consequentialist take. Whether I think there should be problems or not, you're gonna get a lot of fucking problems. And that's what's been going on I think, with the culture wars of late. They've just cracked down way too tight on stuff that's not harmful. If some guy wants to thirst after an anime girl, I don't care. But they're focusing so much on that and took their eye off the ball on, hey, abortion. Here we are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem. Not all problems are equal. The recent Supreme Court stuff, whether or not you have a fair chance to get into a good university, I think we can all agree is a much bigger problem than whether somebody will, let you hire them to build a wedding website. And I think
Yeah.
I think it's important that we recognize that. Like, a wedding website's a nice to have. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't have one, you can still get married.
Yeah.
A college degree, on the other hand, it begs the question, should we be just getting over our obsession with the Ivy League? And I think the answer is yes.
I agree with that one.
Yeah, I just, you know, when multiple Supreme Court justices come from the exact same school, something's wrong, because that means, completely qualified people are getting left out. It's too much of an echo chamber. There's not enough diversity of thought, which is what, various types say they want. They say they want diversity of thought, but when it comes to actually doing things to do it, no, it's lip service.
It's like when creators say, "Oh, we have a diverse studio. We have a diverse writers' room of all women."
Right.
Most of whom probably went to some of the same or very similar colleges. I'm
Well,
like, okay, where's the diversity there?
yeah. And well, the thing about diverse rooms, and I'm a fan of legit diverse rooms, but you are going to get conflicts. You are going to get people not speaking the same language. And as a manager, you have to account for that. And that's legit hard when you're on a pretty crushing deadline. I'm very sympathetic to that. You got to do it anyway. You want, I'm working through Tears of the Kingdom right now. And that's an example of a game where they clearly had the time and the support to do it right. Maybe other companies should be taking the hint that if you want better product, if you want the ability, if you want true diversity of thought, you got to give these things enough time, and they got to be properly funded. And does that mean there's going to be fewer shows?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the trade-off. That's when you start getting people going, no, wait. Right? Because fewer shows means fewer jobs.
Mm-hmm.
All these solutions are imperfect. So you do get people, a lot of people who end up in positions of authority have raging imposter syndrome. And it's a big problem with women in the C-suite, female executives.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is the metaphor is, you climb above, you rise through the corporate ladder, and you kick it down so nobody can follow behind you. And one of the nasty realities is that women do that to other women in most industries more often than not, because it was just so miserable getting there, and they know they're an affirmative action hire.
Mm-hmm. And you know, it's interesting because I see some people claim that, oh, the only reason women aren't nicer to each other is because we've been trained to compete for male attention
I
and
think that's
socialized.
partially true. That's not the only reason.
Yeah, that doesn't explain everything about it. That
Yeah.
doesn't explain
There's an
some of the
element where women are people, and
yeah.
some of us are shitty people.
And
Period. End of story.
and not all cattiness comes down to female competition.
Cattiness has roots in it. I'm talking beyond cattiness. I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
people who are just like looking to just take out anybody that might have a different idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um I don't know. I mean, you're seeing a lot. I'm getting a lot of cattiness from all genders lately. And that's interesting because, of course, what have we done as a society? We've removed direct confrontation as an option. And that's really what I think it is more than male competition, a competition for male attention. It's
Mm-hmm.
that whenever women just go, like, no, we're gonna work this out. I'm not gonna be nice anymore. That woman is punished. I think that's more than male attention.
Mm-hmm. There also is this pressure of we have to be quiet, we
Right.
have to be good.
Right.
And so it manifests in this sneakiness
Yeah.
and this subtle digs and the knife in the back
Yeah. And
because
women do that when men aren't around.
oh yeah.
Yeah. And
And
I think it's more that everybody's got to be nice and everybody's got to be sweet. No, that's not healthy. That's not human.
mm-hmm.
But it isn't, and this is the thing, it isn't just men that enforce gender norms on men, and it isn't just women who enforce gender norms on women. It's the world.
Mm-hmm.
And this us versus them strategy with the genders is just, it's not working.
No.
It's going in the opposite direction. The distrust out there of people in general is scary. It's this existential crisis. And I I I can rationalize it. I can understand it intellectually, but it's really hard to relate to that. It's training. It's cultural training that millennials on down have been taught. One mistake, you're toast.
Mm-hmm.
And that feeds into the MeToo stuff in a really toxic way, because
And
nobody wants to do anything.
it's so stressful. Like it is cripplingly
Oh yeah. Yeah.
stressful
Yeah.
because you're scared to make a move either
Yeah.
way.
And it's real.
Oh, very.
It's real. I mean, I have single guys complaining, there's no women, and single women complaining there's no men worth dating in the same day. And
You know,
it's
Jerry Seinfeld had a skit similar to that I remember where he's like, you see women reading articles, where to find men.
yeah.
Ladies, we're right here.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact that Jerry Seinfeld did a bit on it is an indication that this is not a new problem, even though people like, oh, it's online dating, it's Me Too. It's now this has been a thing. I mean, it was in the 70s and 80s, it was women's self-defense. And
Mhm.
some men were complaining back then that, oh, women weren't approachable anymore. They can't take a compliment, they're so sensitive. So this is not a new thing. And the reality is, we try to make one of the more difficult uh social equations in the human existence into something that just happens and it's perfect and you don't need to work at it, and we tend to only show the beginning of the relationship
Yeah.
instead of, hey, what it takes to make a long-term relationship work. And so now we've got various workarounds for that of, oh well, long-term relationships just don't work.
Mm.
And
Because we haven't seen it enough in media to know how it works.
Well, but it's also, I mean, what it means is it it's a dirty word now, compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, at the core of it is it's about learning how to meet your own emotional needs. And yes, you need other people for that. But ultimately accepting responsibility for one's own emotional needs and setting boundaries and not waiting for people to do it for you. There's no shortcut there. And that I'm not seeing a lot of that in more, I don't even know what to call it, but in feminist circles, in the loud feminist circles, because that's confused for victim blaming. And it's not the same thing. You can look at your past patterns to learn how to get better boundaries and keep the shitty people from hurting you quite so badly. That doesn't mean you deserve to get hurt and they weren't shitty people.
Wait, no, this is a bit of a tangent, but something you said a minute ago reminded me of it. It's, I posted on Twitter and I told you about this, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm really sick of being nice to male customers at work and them taking it as flirting. And
Oh,
like
has
then
that been happening?
it's happened a couple times where it's like one of them called to ask if I wanted to go to lunch after I helped him with a transaction.
Okay.
And then I was friendly with a guy because I helped him a couple times. And, I was asking questions, being friendly, and he took it as interest. And so I posted on Twitter, I'm really sick of this, that,
Mm-hmm.
me just being nice is taken as an opening. And I had someone respond basically saying, I just didn't know how to communicate with men.
What?
And I'm like, honey, I'm most of my friends are guys, as I've
What?
said.
See, that's what's called the fundamental attribution error. And it's all over the place. I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
I had a
it
situation earlier this week where I was like, stop spamming me with articles about women being raped by cops because you're angry. And the guy accused me of a tirade, said I don't know how to admit mistakes and I need to make an enemy every day. Like, it's just people are really tightly wound. Really, really tightly wound. And this is a guy I've been talking to for a while. Just for whatever reason, it was that topic or that day, he decided to go unhooked. And
and like it,
it's unnerving when it happens. Does that mean I'm going to avoid having discussions with people online? No.
oh,
That guy had a bad day that he's now not going to be able to correct because he blocked me. And so I reverse block on Twitter because people abuse the block and use it to, you know, collect dirt and then screen cap and you can't
mhm.
respond. And do I think the guy's a bad guy? No. Do I think he has serious psychological problems that he'd do better to work on instead of blaming me? Yeah.
Yes.
And that's got nothing to do with being male. That has nothing to do with any identifier other than an unaccountable approach to mental health.
We see that in both men and women. And
Exactly.
the first place I really saw it was Twitter. So, or not Twitter, Tumblr. So
Oh,
yeah.
you know how I feel about Tumblr. You're
Yes.
absolutely right that way. It
Yeah.
just
And that was where I first started to see this mentality that, oh, this is my diagnosis.
yeah.
So you can't expect me to behave any differently. And you know how I feel
Yeah.
about that. I hate that mentality. Because for me, it's like, okay, if you have, whether it's a diagnosis or not, if you have a character flaw, you work on that.
Well, and I say all the time, you are not your diagnoses. And
No.
that is an issue with feminist groups as well, that they, how do I put this? They are a little too labely regarding what it means to be a victim or to be victimized. And while I think people should be able to, how do I put this carefully? I think people should be able to call themselves whatever they need to call themselves to get through the day in the short term. Long term, there are things that encourage healing and post-traumatic growth, and then there are things that discourage healing and post-traumatic growth. And it is very important to know the difference. And a lot of these groups encourage treating victimhood as something you are instead of something that was done to you. And that gets you stuck.
It's almost worn not as a badge of pride, but like,
well, it's a
carte blanche almost.
You can't argue me because I'm this.
Exactly.
And that's, and again, not just women.
No.
There's, there's men and it's,
well, it's the feminist side is where we first started to see it. And then, like I said, I spent a lot of time on the anti-SJW side of YouTube, and it's exactly what they would criticize the left for. But now I see a lot of the people who were criticizing that doing the exact same thing, just from the different direction.
Yeah, they, for whatever reason, it's become this thing of this is how you get noticed. And while that may be true, it's short-term gains causing a lot of long-term damage. Just because somebody gets attention on the internet, it doesn't mean that they're happy or that they can live with themselves.
No.
And at the end of the day, success is about being able to live with the voices in your own head and following people who can't do that and emulating people who just, what I don't understand about the whole culture war is you've got a whole bunch of people saying, these are terrible people and here's all the reason I don't like them. Let's copy their tactics. Don't they think that the tactics are part of the reason they find them so unworthy of respect? So why act like them?
But it's different when we do it.
Well, I don't think it's really about the issue that they're fighting about. That's what I've determined. And this is true of a lot of feminist causes. And I get in trouble for standing up and going, okay, what's this really about? Because this doesn't make any sense on the surface. How dare you? I call it as I see him. And my attitude is if somebody can't handle a frank conversation, they are not worth my time. As if I wanted to play that bullshit game, I would have chose another life path. I like where I am. And I think that's the difference between me and a lot of people in this space, is that I'm good. Would I like a few other things? Sure. More money is always nice. More opportunities to do fun things, always nice. I'd love an extra day of the week, but I'm generally okay with where I'm at. That is not true of a lot of the people who advocate. And it's a really bad idea to use activism as therapy because it hurts.
God.
It's, people, it's an incredibly invalidating thing. I talk about, I remember, I think I talked about this before, that I went to this Twitch event.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a Q&A. And so I asked about what they're doing about the issue of harassment, but I took a different approach to it. I said that, other people who have important things to say are not trying, they're not using their voice because they see me get dogpiled.
Mhm.
And it scares them, even though it's really like, you know, a bunch of people being mad isn't the end of the world. And I must have had 4 or 5 guys, and they were very well meaning, but come up to me and be, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It shouldn't happen. And it's like, what part of it's no big deal got lost in my messaging? They were treating it like this fate worse than death. And for me, it's like every person in this space gets that. It's not,
Yeah, but they want to look like they're one of the good ones.
and I got a bit of that sense, but I also get the sense that they think that men should be able to take it, but women can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more, and I'm not, how do I put this? I'm not accusing anybody of consciously thinking that. And
Oh
I
no,
think the
it's
people that,
something that's subconscious.
yeah, and I think the people that said that stuff to me were incredibly well meaning and were trying to be supportive. But
However,
well, I don't think that some of the things that people do using social media are okay to do to anybody. I think hounding people to the ends of the earth over a fight, over video games or a book or anything like that is stupid. It's disturbed behavior. And I've been talking to people recently who are still having people harassing them over Gamergate. And it's not the pro Gamergate people doing the harassing.
no.
It's the anti-Gamergate types that will not let, the bulk of them are men, not let them rest. And that's psychotic. And I get in a lot of trouble for my opinions on that whole kerfuffle.
Mm-hmm.
If I dare to just call it a kerfuffle. That's what it was. It was a kerfuffle, right? It was not, nobody got physically hurt directly connected to the Gamergate fight. We can't say that about Comicsgate. People were coming to blows in real life on that one.
It,
And
the one time I feel bad for the quartering.
yeah, like that, and that, but I mean that increased his profile. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
I think that doesn't make it something to aspire to,
No.
because it's still physical violence that people shouldn't seek out trying to get beat up for attention. That's messed up. But let's face it, that's the only way to put yourself on the map. Either do something horrible or have something horrible done to you. And that's a bad paradigm.
You know, I was joking in the group chat the other day. We were talking about the whole Colleen Ballinger issue. And I'm like, is that my problem? Am I too nice? Is that why I don't get more attention?
I mean, I don't I honestly think that discovery on the internet is a fluke,
Yeah.
because I don't that I don't understand the whole thing. It just seems like luck, and it does seem, if you're willing to humiliate yourself for attention, you'll do really well on the internet. Everybody else, good luck to you. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It's people who are willing to scream really loudly no matter what the issue is. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just not me. And I admit now there's a question of, because I work one-on-one with people, I'm a lot more careful um about kicking the hornet's nest. I think more about the knock-on effect it'll have on other people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to pull too many punches. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
me. When something's just wrong, I say so.
It's
But
interesting. I saw a clip from your video about the Lola Bunny redesign recently, and it made me realize how much you've calmed down. just in the
Well,
last few years. Like,
the
you still
thing
get
is,
worked up, but
you know what? That is just because I I'm trying to be, I would try to be entertaining with my videos,
Mhm.
but it wasn't working because I get the she's unhinged, she's crazy, and all that. And it's like, guys can get up in people's faces about all that shit. And the thing is, they smoke dope before they do it, which I can't stand. You want to put me off somebody, they have to get high. They're constantly high while they're making content. I can't stand that about Joe Rogan. I don't like it when anybody does it.
No.
But these guys smoke dope, and they're clearly emotionally invested in this stuff, and they're telling the truth. I mean, Matt Walsh has problems. There is something wrong with that dude to be so obsessed with other people's genitals, but he's seen as dangerous. I have an opinion about something that people don't like. I'm insane. And I don't see male YouTubers, the bar is so much higher. I mean, these guys who are going to get beat up and they're not trained boxers, that's unwell in my estimation. And people can actually be, and it's a mental health stigma on people's part too, because I'm open about my PTSD diagnosis. And so it's an easy thing for people to use, but I got to be so careful because the bar at which I get dismissed as, you know, that guy who went after me on Twitter that day, who was bombarding me with tweets about women being raped, accused me of a tirade for one tweet.